Lucy, enough. It might be a little noisy here in the classroom. Lucy is just listening in on the neighbors. Lucy, in your basket right now. So that's what you're going to hear a lot of, because they are noisy over there. Who knows what's going on? All I know is it's on purpose. Sitting over there with the telephone turning on. Oh, she has knowledge. She's being recorded now. She has knowledge. People are listening to her. So it's okay to record because she is a famous person. No, it's not. No, you never told me that. You never gave me an indication of that. Lies, lies, lies. And don't forget, Oakland County Sheriff's Department didn't care that somebody sent bomb parts to my house. I reported it and they did nothing. A federal offense. And Oakland County Sheriff's did nothing. I reported it to the post office. Nothing. Reported to the sheriff's. Nothing. Nothing done about that. That's the reason why we see such rampant crime still today. We know what the problems are. Amping up war and artillery. And they don't want me talking about this. So we got all kinds of stuff going on. Uh-oh. Oh, it's the chat doing on. Oh, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's out there. Who knows? I don't have chat on, that I know. Hold on just a minute. I have to see that. Because that has never been on. So that sounds like a feature that they just turned on. Comments are on. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? What I do know is that we definitely have people who have been hacking away at the phone, hacking away at orders, saying one thing, doing another all the time. I'm sorry, you've got the wrong person over here. This is a person who teaches you a lesson. That's what you got over here, a person who teaches you a lesson. This is the Bookless Classroom, and we are here on April 16th. What's going on April 16th that I should know about? Oh, I'm sorry. Don't care. Other than the classroom, I don't care what's going on out there with the politics and all of this nonsense causing war. Over what? Over what? Over saving face. That's what that's all about. Over saving face. I'm going to close my blinds over here, so I might not have the best lighting going on. I do like that natural light. They want to make me look like some, I don't know. Like, no, she's not that beautiful. It's all lighting. Yeah. And middle fingers. It's all lighting and middle fingers. That's all she's got going on. Okay, well, I think I'm going to leave the blinds closed no matter what. And that is simply because they would probably start the activity like, you know, psychopaths. Anyway, but it does seem like, you know, I talked to him out there. He did seem like he was very nice. No way. Is that possible? No. Couldn't find my little bookmark there. We are reading, as you know, and this is why we've got people who are probably so bothered, especially, and putting thumbs down on this. This is the material you produced. We produced about what's going on during World War I. So to sit over there and be upset that somebody like me is what? Doing something like you don't do. You can't do. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on. That's what I know. Okay. I'm pretty sure this is where I would have left off right at the very beginning. The Battle of Arras dragged on until the middle of May before it was called off. A dent of 4 miles had been made in the German lines, but the only significant gain of ground had been the capture by the Canadians of the dominating Vimy Ridge near Arras. These limited results had cost 150,000 British casualties. The Germans suffered equally, but they quickly rebuilt their defense positions, and the Arras sector returned to the stalemate, still gripping the Western Front. Today, more than 100 military cemeteries around Arras hold the remains of Allied soldiers killed in action there. Is this where we were? It had to have been, right? No. I mean, it is. But we were supposed to start at the very beginning. We were at the beginning of a new chapter. Okay, let's start again, shall we, class? Dr. Feravich, you're so late. Yeah. I told you that I had Lucy to contend with and those noisy neighbors waiting for Dr. Feravich to go, El Loco en la Cabeza. She said it 3 times. She said it 3 times. She said it 3 times. Mutiny, Revolution, and the Collapse of Armies. We're on chapter 12 of our book by Russell Freedman. The United States had declared war, but did not have an army capable of fighting alongside the French and British. The U.S. regular army was small, with only 130,000 men, no tanks, and few aircraft. As a gesture, a token force of 1 infantry division and 2 Marine brigades would be sent to France right away. But it would take at least a year of recruitment, training, and transportation across the Atlantic before the Americans were ready to take the field in Europe. On the Western Front, the stalemate continued. The Germans had pulled back to a heavily fortified position known to the British as the Hindenburg Line and to the Germans as the Siegfried Line. Allied generals still dreamed of achieving a dramatic breakthrough, but every attempt to breach the German defenses was frustrated and repulsed. In April 1917, now we did see this picture yesterday. No, we did not. No, we didn't. The Battle of Arras, forward observation officers of the British artillery equipped with binoculars and a periscope direct fire during the bombardment of German positions. April 8th, 1917. One man uses a field telescope to relay messages back to the firing gun batteries. No comprendo. It's hard for me to understand war. And then when you start putting the technology, which is what the artillery was, I just start blanking out. How about you? That's the reason why people never really liked history in class, was because it was all about war. And it wasn't, it couldn't have been made, about the realities of war, because that certainly would be diametrically opposed to the mission. Not my mission. Not my mission. In April 1917, an offensive by British and Canadian troops at the city of Arras in northern France bogged down in sleet, snow, and ankle-deep mud. After several days of fighting, 3 British generals, alarmed by the heavy loss of life, defied army tradition by protesting directly to their superior, General Douglas Haig. But there was no question in Haig's mind that more gains could be made, and he ordered the attacks to continue. This is just a demonic mindset, is what it is. To train soldiers and train people to behave this way for a mission just is, it really actually is un-American. It's un-American. It's brainwashing. That's what that's really what this comes down to, clearly, brainwashing. The Battle of Arras dragged on until the middle of May before it was called off. A dent in 4 miles had been made in the German lines, but the only significant gain of ground had been the capture by the Canadians of dominating Vimy Ridge near Arras. These limited results had cost 150,000 British casualties. The Germans suffered equally, but they quickly rebuilt defensive positions, and the Arras sector returned to the stalemate, still gripping the Western Front. Today, more than 100 military cemeteries around Arras hold the remains of Allied soldiers killed in action there. I want to pause for just sort of a second in our minds and go to the early bird class. And all of you in Bookless Classroom, I want you to notice something. I want you to notice how the continuity that I read the second time I read that, right? How much more comprehensive it was, my reading was, and the flow of my reading was. That's because the brain knows it already read it. It's kind of like the phone that knows what you've already said. So it puts that phrase up there because you've just said it, right, as your next choice. That's what your brain does automatically. I was able to read that second paragraph much better the second time, not because I even remembered reading what I read, but because the brain remembered. How about that? Oh, look at how she just crosses those lessons over. It's like cross-breeding lessons. Yeah, breeding. We're breeding new minds and breeding new learning. While the British were fighting at Arras, the French launched their own offensive 130 miles to the south across the Aisne River, aimed at a strategic wooded ridge called the Chemin des Dames, Ladies' Road. It probably is des Dames. French General Robert Nivelle had predicted a rupture, as he called it, in the German lines, a decisive blow that would end the war. Instead, his troops advanced with painful difficulties in snow, sleet, and mist, penetrating enemy lines by just a few miles and never reaching the deep German defenses. After 10 blood-soaked days and 130,000 French casualties, including 29,000 killed, the offensive was abandoned and General Nivelle was removed from his command. The failure of the Nivelle offensive was so demoralizing, it almost destroyed the fighting spirit of the French army. Following the defeat at the... I'm just thinking of the French with their flag. I don't know any French, and so all of these accents are coming into mind without any French words with them. We had this discussion back just in the last class in Early Birds. Trying to say something in Spanish really fast. The failure of Nivelle offensive, I already said that. That is terrible. Following the defeat, as I said, though, I could see these French trying to get... what a wonderful spirit. I just have to say, their fighting spirit, they're just like, we're not going to allow this. We are not going to allow this. They take off their little scarves and they're like, we are not going to allow this. That's where the we comes from. God in it. Okay. The failure, don't read it a third time. Following the defeat at Chemin des Dames, French soldiers engaged in what historians have called the mutinies of 1917. They weren't mutinies in the sense that soldiers attacked their officers, but were more like workmen's strikes in which entire units refused to return to the trenches or take part in new attacks. The war so far had been fought at the cost of nearly 1 million French lives out of a male population of 20 million, a shocking death toll that had shaken the French resolve to fight in what increasingly seemed an endless conflict. General Philippe Pétain, who replaced Nivelle as commander-in-chief, dealt with the mutiny more through persuasion than punishment. Several thousand soldiers were court-martialed and 49 were shot, but for the great majority, the men under his command, Pétain introduced reforms, longer periods of rest, more home leave, and better food. Genius! What? Oh my, well, give this guy a PhD. And he refrained for the moment from ordering further offensives. I set about supporting serious cases of indiscipline with the utmost urgency, Pétain explained. I will maintain this repression firmly, but without forgetting that it applies to soldiers who have been in the trenches with us for 3 years and who are our soldiers. Bravo, because I don't know if I've ever read in the newspapers or have been said aloud praise by our administrators of our soldiers. I'm sorry, Vietnam is an example of how we did not praise our soldiers or support them. And you know, if Army General would, I could easily see him throwing up his arms and saying, an Army General, and saying that's war, right? That's war. While French soldiers engaged in acts of collective indiscipline, as their commanders preferred to say, the Russian army was collapsing and Russia itself was in turmoil. At one time, most Russians were united in supporting the war effort. However, the corruption and incompetence of the Tsar's government, along with huge losses on the battlefronts, had eroded the army's morale and darkened the mood of the Russian public. Yeah, for sure. Here is a French soldier rests in a dugout behind the lines. So it seems that as when they are saying rest periods, what they are saying is because it's not leave, right? Rest periods aren't leave. I don't know if it's necessarily the same thing as putting them in the, you know, what they were doing before, way in the back line and then moving them up later on. But this seems to be, to me, then rest period, right? Is when you're in your dugouts behind the lines. So longer rest periods in your dugouts before you have to go back out. Early in 1917, acute shortages of food and fuel led to strikes and riots in Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, so this is in Russia, the Russian capital. When troops joined the demonstrators, instead of firing on them, the riots turned to revolution. The army refused to support Tsar Nicholas, and in March, he was forced to give up his throne, climaxing years of government repression, unrest, and revolutionary agitation. A new liberal government under Alexander Kerensky vowed to continue the war for the defenses of the Russian homeland. The summer, a brief Russian offensive faltered in the face of a German counterattack. Russian defenses crumbled, and the retreat became a headlong rout as entire units refused to fight. Soldiers deserted by the tens of thousands, voting for peace with their feet as they headed for home. In September 1917, as a German army moved towards the Russian capital, power began to slip from Kerensky's hands into those of a revolutionary leader named Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, head of the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Communist Party. So we can see then what ends up happening with people who have unrest. And this is is the prediction of communism. It's not necessarily and then chaos. It's not necessarily the, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the real motives are of communists. It seems like the label was put on people who become. So it seems to me, I'm trying to understand some people's real revolt against socialism, not national socialism, but Marxism, what we would call Marxism, right? So, which is taking government taxes and making sure that people have health care, making sure that they have the things that they need to live. Cell phones don't cost $1,000. Are you kidding me? Do you know that in China they've got all of those parts in bins, and they can take those parts and put those phones together, having whatever color they want, whatever features that they want, if they want more camera or more speed, whatever they want. And they cost pennies. And this is what we pay in America. And that has everything to do with capitalism, because that has everything to do with marketing, folks. Oh, that's what they do. They make sure that you buy their product, and that's what's cost. That is what costs. It is research and development, R&D for our products, right? R&D for our products. Okay, so I'm thinking out loud here, but it seems to me the Communist Party got a label. It wasn't necessarily their ideas to create chaos, but to be revolutionary, the consequence is chaos. So I do think that there's this negative spin. Not that I'm a communist, I'm not, I'm a Christian, but some people might say communism. Who even knows, right? How they change their labels in order to suit, what me and Bernie call the oligarchy. When the communists finally seized control of the government in November, Lenin's calls for peace, bread, and land had overwhelming popular support. He immediately asked Germany for an armistice, thereby ending Russia's part in World War I. The new revolutionary government had proclaimed the socialization of lands as soldiers left the front to return to their villages and claim what they believed would be land for the taking. The Russian army did, in fact, begin to melt away. So when we were talking yesterday about this chapter and reading this chapter, we were saying, what is mutiny? Do you know what mutiny is from what we've read so far? Do you know what mutiny is? Mutiny would be the soldiers leaving the war. That's mutiny. Soldiers leaving the war. What is revolution? Well, we're finding out what revolution is right now, right? I love the way this book is organized. It's just beautiful. They give you, when we had the examples of the land war, we had an example of the Allies winning, and we had an example or having tragedy, right? Allies having tragedy, and the they called them the Central Powers, didn't they? Weren't they called the Central Powers? What are they calling those? They're calling them Germany. That's what they're calling them. Germany. They're calling them Germans. Anywho, but losses for Germany as well, right? So the organization of this book is it's well done because it's showing you both sides, and then it showed you the war on the water, right? And now it's showing you what's really happening, the tragedy of the war. I mean, not that this book hasn't been filled with tragedy. It does seem, honest to gosh, I'm almost positive that this book was read in my college class. to give us a background on World War I. I was a little upset about it. I was like debating on whether or not I was going to drop the class because I had dropped another history class and started thinking history is a joke. What's going on here with this self-professed ADHD professor? I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Adios, amigo. And then I come into this other class and they're reading an elementary school book. But again, so am I reading an elementary school book, and I just happen to think it's for elementary students as well as for adults when we really want to find out what exactly, I just want to see what's going on. What exactly is going on here? Okay, so let me actually go see if I might be able to open up those blinds. And $10 says they're going to start all kinds of activity out there. That's going to bother Lucy, but I'm going to open him up and see because Lucy's asleep. Okay, I'm back. I think they're still moving around over there, but I don't know. Definitely are. Crazy things are going on. Okay. This picture here, I need to read where I was. As you know, as strikes and riots swept Russia in March 1917, soldiers sided with the demonstrators, refused to support the Tsar, and voted to join the Russian Revolution. When the communists finally seized control of the government in November, Lenin's calls for peace, bread, and land had overwhelming popular support. He immediately asked Germany for an armistice. I already read that. Did I read the next one? I don't think so. In March 1918, after much delay and hesitation, the Russians signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, surrendering the Germans an area 3 times the size of Germany itself. This territory contained a quarter of Russia's population, a third of its agricultural land, and about half of its heavy industry. By then, the Germans had transferred the best units of their Eastern Army to the Western Front, where they were preparing for a new offensive against the French and British before the Americans arrived. Now, also, this is very interesting as well. What just came to mind as I'm thinking about this is that these really are neighbors fighting with one another. And this is not necessarily to whatever, although I do remember reading that there are, I'm sure, I would think that there were good motives in many people in colonizing Africa. I remember reading about it. I don't remember it being so sinister, but to attack your neighbors and steal the best parts of their lands, that's just really unforgivable, right? Again, I don't know the intentions of those colonizing, but it's clear what Germany did. They gave that, their people are like, all right, and remember this was from the beginning in the colonization, right? They were just like, no, you have too much land over there, and we don't have enough land in those colonies. Let's take a quick look at that, all right? I'm going to take a quick look at that and bring that up for you. They're so noisy upstairs there. I always should turn this on, and then I don't turn it on right away. There we go. Okay, so what do we see there? I see nothing. Okay, so yeah, they are called the Central Powers there. We also had Austria-Hungary in there, but they are basically fighting a different kind of war. So, what was I looking for? Oh, this is what I was looking for. As I just kind of go through this without whatever. So here we've got Germany in the light blue. See how much land Germany has there? And let's not forget that along with this, Germany thinks that they are superior to the other imperialists, right? Germany thinks that they are superior to the French. Germany thinks that they are superior to the English. Germany certainly thinks they're superior to the Russians, right? So all of their neighbors, this is coming out of atheism and eugenics, and also this kind of, I think they called it apoatheism is what they called, or which is a why would I have said that? Oh, it's apathetic. That's what it was. Apatheist. That's what it was. APA. That's exactly what an APA is. An apatheist. That's exactly what an APA is. An apatheist. Apathetic about theism. Right? So that's what this outcome is eugenics. I'm apathetic. God is apathetic about me. And isn't that really what it is? I mean, isn't that really what it is? You mean to tell me that the Jewish people are the chosen people? Isn't that really what it is? God, you are apathetic to me? I'm going to be apathetic to you. And this is what human apatheism looks like. Again, those are put quotes around what I'm saying there, right? I'm not saying that because I know that people take things out of context, and I try and get it so that they can't do that, because that's really what I'm dealing with here. People taking things and putting them on the dark web out of context. I mean, it started with Hillary Clinton and those red eyes. She doesn't have red eyes. And if you're not smart enough to realize that putting red eyes in somebody's eyes does make them look evil, especially when you've got the camera down below and the camera looking up at the person and the person looking like this. You can make anybody look evil. That's just ignorance. It's just pure ignorance. Anybody can lie. Anybody can lie. But to sit over here and bring you this kind of truth all the time, great content filled with truth all the time, that's nearly impossible. That's what I do. Because that's nearly impossible. Another setback for the Allies was taking place along the Isonzo River in Austria's mountain. That's what we were just saying. What's going on with Austria-Hungary? Exactly where this is. So mutiny, revolution, and the collapse of armies. So what's going on with Austria-Hungary? So another setback from the Allies was taking place along the Isonzo River in Austria's mountain borderland, where Italians and Austrian armies had been battling since the summer of 1915. With Russia's defeat, Germany was able to send reinforcements to the Austrians. In October 1917, near the little frontier town of Caporetto, the Austrians with their German allies achieved an unexpected breakthrough in what is called the 12th Battle of the Isonzo. The entire Italian front collapsed, depriving the Italians of gains they had won at great cost during the past 2 years. Retreating Italian troops were driven down from the mountains onto the plains as hundreds of thousands of soldiers surrendered or deserted, disappearing into the countryside. The Italians finally managed to regroup 80 miles to the rear along the Piave River, but the Italian army, like the French, would not return to the offensive until the following year. Wow. Well, you know, if that's what isn't that what a government is supposed to do? They're supposed to say, hey, that's too much for our soldiers to take. I mean, it's not that we're out of the war, but right now we just can't deal with you guys. So did we read this one? I think we read. So the soldiers sided with the demonstrators, refused to support the Tsar, and voted to join the Russian Revolution. That's what that picture is. I think we saw that, but I didn't. It didn't register when I was reading because I'm thinking about the other things, some of the other things I've read and going on here. On the Western Front during the summer and fall of 1917, the British fought what one historian has called the most notorious campaign of the war, the Third Battle of Ypres. Remember, we read about that battle in the very beginning, right? I think I'm saying that right. Ypres, also known as the Battle of Passchendaele, after the Belgian village that was the ultimate objective of the British offensive and was totally destroyed during the fighting. With the French army, and then, so this is the third, they had two, right? I think we read about one and maybe the upcomings of number 2 and 3. With the French army marking time, British General Haig was convinced that the outcome of the war depended on the armies and under his command. Haig worried that the Americans would not arrive in time to prevent an Allied defeat. The British could win a decisive victory, he believed, by opening a new offensive in Belgian Flanders over the old battlefields around the ruined town of Ypres. The objective was to break through the German lines, advance to the Belgian coast, and capture the seaports used by German U-boats as their forward bases. Haig's offensive, fought by British, Canadian, and Anzac troops, opened with stunning success. It ended by almost breaking the heart of the British Army. The first objective was to capture Messines Ridge south of Ypres and use it as a jumping off point for the main push toward the Belgian coast. For months, special British units had been secretly digging tunnels under the German positions, leading to 19 underground chambers packed with 1 million pounds of explosives. Just before dawn on June 7th, following a massive artillery bombardment, the explosives were detonated with a noise heard 140 miles away in London, turning the crest of Messines Ridge into a flaming volcano. When the attacking force reached the crest, the dazed defenders, those few who had survived, were unable to offer any resistance. So that's what's breaking the hearts of the British, it sounds like. With Russian turmoil and the French army on strike, the Italian army suffered a devastating defeat in the rugged mountain region along Italy's border with Austria. In this photo, Italian heavy guns are being transported up a mountain road during the 12th Battle of Isonzo. So let me see here. So they've got The assault. So I don't really. So was it purpose? So was it? Let me see here. Let's see this. A British artillery observer watches as shells rain down on Messines Ridge in the distance. June 1917. So this is the. So they packed it with explosives underground, and it detonated as planned. I'm sorry, I'm not getting this exactly. The assault on Messines Ridge was a spectacular tactical success. Okay. But when the main British offensive opened at the end of July, the fighting quickly became another nightmare battle, more horrifying and pointless than Verdun or Somme. Heavy rains combined with continual bombardments from both sides turned the battlefield into an impassable morass of mud. The ground is churned up to a depth of 10 feet and is the consistency of porridge. Reported a British artillery commander, the middle of the shell craters are so soft that one might sink out of sight. There must be hundreds of German dead buried here, and now their own shells are replowing the area and turning them up. Wounded men died when they were unable to lift themselves out of the soft, shifting slime. Despite mounting casualties, General Haig was determined to persist no matter how wet the battlefield became. The enemy is faltering, he told his commanders, and a good decisive blow might lead to decisive results. A British officer, and they did have a goal to end the war, to win the war in order to end the war, right? The British officers, it's just a no-win situation. War is just a no-win situation, it seems to me. A British officer, Edwin, because you're creating brainwashed soldiers from those who are already so rigidly brainwashed in warfare, right? And the end result, no matter, despite everything, that's no win. That's a no win. I mean, we are taught in scripture that we aren't supposed to make vows, and that certainly sounds like vows up the you know what. A British officer, Edwin Vaughan, described the efforts of his unit to move forward. Up the road, we staggered, shells bursting all around us. I just want to make sure I was in the right place. A man stopped dead in front of me, and exasperated, I cursed him and butted him with my knee. Very gently, he said, "I'm blind, sir," and turned to show me his eyes and nose torn away by a piece of shell. "Oh, God, I'm sorry, Sonny," I said. "Keep going on the hard part," and left him staggering back in the darkness. Can you imagine? No. Dear Jesus, God in heaven. The village of Wichita near Ypres after its capture by the British on June 7th, 1917. And then stretcher bearers struggle through mud up to their knees as they carry a wounded soldier to safety. So this is what they had to deal with after the explosions, because they dug tunnels and all that dirt and then rain. It's really, nobody's thinking ahead. They're just thinking right now, in the moment. That's it. From other shell holes from the darkness on all sides came the groans and wails of wounded men, faint, long, sobbing moans of agony and despairing shrieks. It was too horribly obvious that dozens of men with serious wounds must have crawled for safety into new shell holes. And now the water was rising above them, and powerless to move, they were slowly drowning. Horrible visions came to me with those cries of men lying maimed out there, trusting that their pals would find them, and now dying terribly alone amongst the dead of the inky darkness, and we could do nothing to help them. Yeah, it would be like quicksand. That would absolutely be quicksand. After 2 days and nights of the battlefield, Vaughn's unit was relieved and he led his survivors back to the rear. The next morning when he awoke and reported for muster, my worst fears were realized. Standing near the breakfast cookers were 4 small groups of bedraggled, unshaven men from whom the quartermaster sergeants were gathering information concerning any of their pals they had seen killed or wounded. It was a terrible list. Out of our happy little band of 90 men, only 15 remained. You know, and you're not talking about staggering numbers like thousands, but can you imagine the loss? That kind of loss that you would have seen, right, in front of you. General Haig ordered his brave troops to battle on until the rubble of bricks that had once been the village of Passchendaele was finally captured by the Canadians on November 10th, 1917. By then, the British had suffered 240,000 casualties, including 70,000 killed, for a gain of some 5 miles of Flanders mud. The following March, Passchendaele would be lost again to the Germans, and in the summer of 1918, it would be retaken by the Allies. An old French couple visit their former home and find a pile of stone and debris. Okay, well, we are going to start chapter 13. Lafayette, we are here. America joins the fight. Chapter 13. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We got through another chapter in our book, The War to End, make sure I had it right in my head. The War to End All Wars by Russell Freedman. It is a wonderful book. And again, I am just tipping my hat to, no, I don't know why I say that. It's because it's not a salute. I don't want to give you a salute. Because I've had people taking pictures of me saluting, as I've already said. To the Wayne State faculty who taught me and read this book, World War I. I mean, I remember even like thinking, Russell Freedman, seriously, you're going to read a middle school book and the author's name is Russell Freedman, and I'm supposed to believe that this is real? Well, how about the content, Annette? How about the content? And then act like you're going to be a doctor someday. That was way back in my freshman year at Wayne State. So, I mean, I had like a couple years under my belt, so whatever. I mean, I don't know. I was a sophomore, probably. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I worked for my degree. I worked for these brains, no matter what you call it. Phone a degree all you want. I still have the brain power. I still have it, right? And what are you doing? Manipulating so that it looks like this and not that. Dr. Annette Feravich, I am here in the classroom. I will be back here at 11:30, probably on time. Maybe a little late. Today seems like I'm 10 minutes late for everything. I don't think I was 10 minutes late today, so stop criticizing. This is Annette Feravich, Dr. Annette Feravich to you. Day 181. It's someone changed the chalkboard. The chalkboard gets changed for the reading room, if you've noticed. But I did change the date. April 16th, here we are. Thanks for joining me here in the classroom.